there's this moment where Jesus is telling a story, and the thing that probably made a lot of his listeners angry are that's the message that gets lodged in your heart, and you have to look on it.
Welcome to She Leads, a podcast about leadership, faith, and relationships. I'm your host, Thea, and I'm so glad that you've joined in today. Thank you for being a part of this conversation where we have been exploring topics with women in leadership from all different facets. Each week, I always invite you to be a part of the conversation by sending your comments to sheleadscomments@gmail.com. And this week, I wanted to read one from Kim. She wrote in, just binged several episodes. Great show, great mission. As I'm clearly trying to find my own path, I have loved each guest. Well, thank you, Kim, for joining in. And again, I would love to hear more from you. What are you enjoying? What questions are coming to mind? How might you join this conversation here on She Leads? Today, I'm really excited to welcome Amy Vogel, who is going to be sharing with us today a little bit about where she's leading. Amy, would you just introduce yourself to the podcast?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Amy Vogel. My author name is Amy W. Vogel, and I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a consultant, and really where I focus my mission is I'm really driven to share vision, create spaces for healing, and to give people hope. It's pretty simple, but people want to find out more about me, they can look at my website. It's amywvogel, Vogel.mycanva.site, and that's where you learn more.
Awesome. And we'll definitely have that link in the show notes for you. I always like to ask my guests to introduce themselves, and then how did you get connected to the podcast? What made you say yes to today?
Well, without divulging certain personal information, I was referred by my friend LM Schaffer. Sorry, LM. That's how I have to say it on my Bluetooth, so my phone recognizes. LM Schaefer. Mm-hmm. But she put me in touch with you when she wasn't able to be a podcast guest, and so I just really appreciate it. LM, I love you more than my luggage, so I'm sure she'll be listening.
Yeah, and LM and I worked together down at Chapel United Methodist Church in Lake Jackson, which a few weeks ago we met Jennifer Burkhart, who runs preschool there. So just the podcast community knows about that space, and I'm really grateful that LM connected us, and I'm so glad that you're willing to say yes and come on today. I just want to jump in and talk to me about this wonderful thing that you are a published author.
Yeah. How
did that come into being, and what are your most recent works?
So I was writing for about 10 years. We were living in Trinidad as expats at the time, and the first thing I ever wrote was a Bible study lesson on the Proverbs 31 woman, and I wrote it from the perspective of like, okay, who is this woman for real? I know she's not a literal woman, but and as I was writing it, I just felt like God was leading me, encouraging me to write more. I had been in sales and not trained as a writer, but at the time I was home with 2 small kids. And so I just started writing. I started writing a blog, and I just got into it over the course of a few years. Several churches I was involved in. I was involved in devotional projects they wrote for like Lent and Advent, and I was like, I think I have a kind of a knack for this. And so I just started writing. And the first book I ever finished, I wrote tons of books, tons of projects. I think 6 or 7 before I ever finished one, and it's a book called Third Person. And it was traditionally published through Seedbed. It's still out there now, but it's a devotional that invites you into a relationship with the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I got published the first time. And then this now second time around, I've become an independent author. And so I've been self-publishing. And so my most recent release is a book called Come to Me. It's a devotional for healing from hurt, written out of my own experience with hurt and with healing. And I've got another book coming out in January and plans for lots more.
That's super exciting. So one of my dreams is to write a book. And sometimes I get myself wrapped up in, well, what happens when it's published? Will it be liked? What will my family think when they read the truth and things like that? And then God reminds me, I haven't called you to publish it. I've called you to write it.
Right.
And so why don't you write it?
Yep.
And then we can discuss all those concerns. Did you have any fears as you were
of course.
writing and pouring your heart out?
My big prayer was, because I was in business and I was in sales before I stayed home with my girls and before I started writing. And so my prayer was, I can work this business in to death. God, you want me to do this. You've called me to write. You take care of the business part. Where I need your help is the discipline to actually write and be led into the creative space to create with something, create something that's jointly with the Spirit, something that communicates hope. And again, I wrote lots of things, but it was third person, which was the first one I actually, put the final comma, the end on the manuscript. And that's when it got put in the hands of the publisher. So for me, my journey was, I not just had to start writing it, I had to actually complete it.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And you mentioned that you wrote about healing kind of through your own journey. Yeah. Do you want to share a little bit about what that experience was like? I mean, what were you experiencing as you're writing about healing and dealing with it on your own?
So in 2022, I was serving in a ministry context. I was essentially an associate pastor, paid part-time, not ordained. I was a lay pastor. For those of you who don't know, those are just the non-clergy people. And I'd been serving in that capacity on and off for 10 years. So I started as a volunteer, and then 5 years in, I got hired on staff. And in August of 2022, the day I decided to give my resignation because I was just completely overwhelmed and depressed and burnout, was the same day they decided to close the church. So it was like trauma on trauma on trauma. So I said, you know what, I need to heal. Yeah. And I didn't do anything for the rest of 2022 except basically read. And then about 2.5 to maybe 3 months in, I finally felt like I could start writing something. And it wasn't until about a month later after I started writing that I thought, okay, this could be something I move forward with. Mm-hmm. So it was, massive burnout, depression, lots of loss, and writing for me has always been therapeutic. So this was the way to heal.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So, do you typically journal as a way of self-care and self-reflection? Is that a part of your process already, or do you only write to publish?
No, I write other stuff too. No one should ever read that. In fact, I've instructed several key people in my life, like what Beth Moore says, that, when I die, burn my journals. Yeah, please. I've told my kids, don't read them. Like this, there's snapshots of a moment in time of how I was feeling, and that might not be reflective of how I really feel. So don't read the journals. But yes, I do when the mood strikes. It's not every day, okay. But and I don't write every day. I know there are writers who they're very, very disciplined and they write every day. I have to go when it hits. But the more that I write, the more consistent I am, the better my writing is. Yeah.
So how did you move from maybe just a personal, therapeutic process into this is actually going to be something for others to read, or even maybe that gave you the inspiration to be like, maybe others could heal too?
Yeah. I knew from writing that first Bible study lesson in Trinidad, that was like almost 15 years ago, I knew, because that was actually the presentation, I had to basically teach the group that day. And so I knew that this was not just for me, that this was some kind of avenue for me to use my other gifts, speaking and engaging with groups and helping other people. So I knew from the get-go
that this was something you wanted to share.
This was a group project. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. What has been the benefit in sharing this part of your journey? What have you already gained?
I was talking to a friend of mine, because the book launch that we did for this back in June, the book launch party it was wonderful. And I got to see a lot of people I hadn't seen in a while, and it was a myriad of people. So you had all these people mixing from different spaces in my life, but I was genuinely uncomfortable. I mean, I'm used to speaking in front of groups and have no problem leading, but the focus was completely on me. Yeah. And that was something I was super uncomfortable with. And I had reached the point where it was out there. And so when I write, yes, I write from my own perspective and my own understanding, my own experience, but it's so you can do something with it. And so I remember when I first sent the manuscript for Third Person to the publisher, I felt like I was handing my firstborn child over to the publisher. It was just so nerve-wracking. But once I did that, I was like, well, okay, this is out there in the world now. Yeah. And so it's not mine anymore. And so when I publish a book, that's when it goes from being a me project to a we project. And, now it's yours. So when you read it and go through it, it's for you. It's for you to take that experience and engage with God. And, my part's done. So
you mentioned it being, to turn that over to the publisher and kind of let go as maybe being a little bit difficult. What other difficulties have you experienced in kind of letting your words be out there for the world?
Well, you have to get over all of the egoic fears and insecurities and the patterns of thought. It's a continual process in surrender. It's a continual process in healing so that the real you can shine through. I don't necessarily suffer from what a lot of writers will call imposter syndrome. I just, at this point, I'm insecure. In fact, my best friend will tell me that she reads everything that I write, and every single time, it doesn't matter whether it's an Instagram post or it's a book or what, every single time I text her and say, I've sent this to you, I immediately say, I don't know if it's any good. And she's like, you say that every time. Yeah. And so there is that vulnerability that you have to have those safe people that you share it with in order to get the right feedback. Is this something worth sharing? Is this good enough to share with the world? Because you don't want to put junk out there. But but once you have those safe people to go to, then it's a lot easier to allow other people to experience. And frankly, I love trolls. I love people on the internet that have negative feedback. They're so fun. Just you don't know me, so please come and say what you have to say, and let me make a pithy response, and bless you, and let's be on our way.
Yeah. So I don't think I've ever met anybody that says I love internet trolls.
I do. I love them. They're the best.
Yeah, but I love what you said about the friends who will give you that honest feedback.
Yeah.
My question is, how do you cultivate that? How do you build that trust? Letting people in. As a pastor in the church world, I'm a pastor because of relationships, and more than likely because of my own hurt in recent years. I find myself really struggling to find those places of trust and safety. And so my question is, how do you cultivate that? How do you build a circle of people who are going to, love all of you, but also be honest with you, to say when it's really great, or even when it's like it needs some more work.
Right. Well, they're probably already in your life to a certain extent, but there's also, just like everything, there's trial and error. And you have to really cultivate a trust and a level of self-acceptance that, there have been times when people have come, like even my mom, I've written some stuff and she's like, I don't like that you said that. And I'm like, well, I appreciate that. And maybe I can go word it differently, but the message is what I feel like I was supposed to say at the time. And it's just one of those things where you have to work on yourself and you don't have to be secure in yourself, but you have to be working to some level of security that what has been put in you is worth sharing. And then you will also then attract those people, and you will know those people that you can share it with. And, sometimes I've shared with people and they're like, yes, I'll read it this weekend. And then 6 weeks later, you never hear anything from them. So again, trial and error. And it takes time to build that community. But it's not ever going to be something, you're not ever going to have 15 people reading your work at any given time. It's going to be 2 or 3 initially. And then, in the publishing world, especially around fiction books, there's, you have the small alpha readers, the first people, and the fiction book I'm releasing in January, I had 2 alpha readers, my best friend and my oldest daughter. And so we started there, and I let them tell me whether or not the story was any good. And then, I finished it, edited, went back and rewrote a lot, and then sent it to the editor. Now I'm waiting for the editor to give me feedback, and then it'll move on to what's called beta readers. Yeah. And that's a larger group of people. And then there's advanced reader copy teams, there's street teams, so you, just like any project, it gets bigger as it's shaped.
Okay.
Or it should be. Mm-hmm. And, those initial people that you're going to share it with, it's going to be a very small group. Yeah. So
I love that you said you share it with your daughter, and I just thought she's probably really honest. Like, hopefully you have a relationship where that's where it is. Yeah. And I don't know, how old is she?
She's 19.
Yeah. So I would imagine a 19-year-old woman is, when asked an opinion about something their mother is doing, is being very honest, which is really smart.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All throughout. She was like, I don't like that you wrote this, but I like the story. Yeah. She's like, I like where it's going, but I don't like this. The character is not acting right.
Yeah.
But I asked a lot of people. Yeah. That's the thing. I asked my middle daughter, who's 17, and she was like, nah, no. So, you at like any good sales pipeline, you have a big pipeline and then it narrows down. So I got to 2 people. I was happy with that. And then I shared it with some other people who never read it. And it's fine.
So how is the fiction process going? This is a little bit of a switch from Bible study and devotional. How's that for you?
It uses a different aspect of my creativity. Yeah. So I'm also still writing planning to write nonfiction as well. I've got my next devotional, I think, in titles. So once I have a title, I know I have something I can go with. And the next nonfiction title is It's Only a Place to Start. And it's going to be a collaborative effort where I'm going to involve other people's stories. It won't just be my reflections. Yeah. It will be, stories of other people that you can meditate on and then glean wisdom from. And so that maybe is a 2024 project, maybe 2025. But so it's kind of like snack writing when I write devotionals. Like, it's a good snack. It holds me over for a couple of hours, but fiction is like gluttony. Like, it's so much more of a complex process because you have to build a world, you have to build a story. And so it's just a different avenue of expression. And I really like, it's fun. I really like it. So
we were talking, I think just yesterday, about the narrative arc and storytelling. This is a piece of, I would argue, humanity that we are continually going to be drawn to. We have been. I don't think it will ever go away. Talk to me about how storytelling, how that's maybe been helpful in this healing journey. Like, how do you see that a part of it?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned this. My healing really accelerated when I just let myself rest, for one. Yeah. And my form of rest was escape. And my form of rest in escapism was reading. Okay. And I went back to, and I've always loved reading, but I had gotten away from fiction reading for 10 years while I was doing all this, because you got to read the theology and you got to read the commentaries and you got to, read all of those things in order to preach and teach. And so I went back to essentially my first love of reading, which was fantasy fiction. And I just escaped. I escaped my own reality through my imagination into somebody else's story. Yeah. And so it let my body rest, but it also let my soul start to dream again. And so storytelling for me, it's crucial because stories are what stay with you. This is why podcasts work, because people are coming and telling a story. Yep. And that's why the parables of Jesus work. This is why the entire Bible works, and all of the sacred texts, because there's a story that you can read yourself into. Yes. And that gives you the opportunity to see your own reality from a different point of view. And in the Jewish tradition, you can take it and turn it like a gem. You can look at all the different facets of it. And it's just powerful. I mean, as humans, we were oral before we ever had written language. And so story was the way that you communicated what you needed other people to know. Yes. So it's, not nursery rhymes, but like Grimm's fairy tales and those are object lessons for children.
Yes.
Don't go out of the house at night,
Yes.
those kind of things. Don't go to the weird lady's house. She might put you in an oven,
Yeah, that we can learn through a story,
Yeah.
right? Like you talked about too, Jesus's parables, same thing. He used, really great illustrations, right? Real life, tangible illustrations for the people to understand. And like, hey, it's like this, right? He says that over and over as well. And it's those stories that also can captivate our attention.
Yep.
Kind of even back to a good sermon has to have really good illustrations. And really, we love to see a story unfold. Keep us wondering, keep us guessing, keep us engaged, make us care.
Right.
A bunch of theological terms most people are just going to gloss over. I'm like, I don't know. He's been talking about, ology for 15 minutes. I'm lost.
Yeah. There was one pastor. He didn't last very long at this church I was a part of about 15, 20 years ago. I loved him because it was like he was like a professor, going to a seminary class. So I loved it. The rest of the congregation did not, because it was just too dry.
Yeah.
And, and Jesus was a master storyteller,
Yes.
and especially uncomfortable truths within a story, because that's when, in I don't know if you watched the show Ted Lasso, but anyway, there's a line where the therapist says to Ted, the main character, forgive my language here, but I'm a little salty sometimes, but she says the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off.
Right.
And so there's this moment where Jesus is telling a story, and the thing that probably made a lot of his listeners angry that's the message that gets lodged in your heart, and you have to work on it. Right. And that's when you think about all the things he said to Nicodemus under the cover of darkness. I mean, that guy probably chewed on that stuff forever, until he got it, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus never told a story where he expected everybody to get it the first time.
Right. Right.
They didn't. And so it's one of those forms of communication that you said it, that it captivates you, it sucks you in, you stay with it, and then it stays with you long after the story is finished.
And like you said too, you're able to kind of find yourself in these stories and find yourself in these characters or aspects of them. I was watching a show on Hulu. It's called Reboot. It's cute, right? They're rebooting a 90s sitcom, and the showrunner, and she ends up working with her dad. And I can't even talk about the last scene. I mean, it still just brings me to tears. And just and I'm watching my husband. I just start to cry. I've got to turn it off. I got to walk away. And he's like, what just happened? Because the story that is presented between this girl and her father is my story between me and my father. And it just, and I hadn't been thinking about it, hadn't been wanting to think about it.
Yep.
And all of a sudden this truth is right there. And it's just, so you got to work, like you said, it makes you work through it. It makes you deal with it. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit more about Come to Me. What's happening in this book? What can people expect to find? What's going to make them work on some stuff?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
So the way that it started is the same way it finishes. I started this with just one verse, the verse from Matthew 11:28 through 30. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy burden, and I will give you rest. Yes. Take my yoke. It is light. I'll be easy upon you. I'm gentle and humble in heart. Come to me, and you'll find rest for your souls. Paraphrasing a little bit, I used a lot of different versions, so they are all kind of jumbled in my head now. But I started with that verse. That was when I felt like I was in a place where I needed to write again. That really is what I felt like the Spirit was saying. Stay with this verse. And so the whole book, and this is unusual for devotionals, it's just that one verse. For 30 days, for 29 days, the 30th day is a blessing based on that verse. But for 30 days, you just stay in that verse. And there's a reflection. Like I said, I use different versions from the Amplified to the First Nations version, which is a new version. Happens to be my favorite, the Message, NIV, all of them. I wrote a reflection, then a prayer, and then there's a healing step which it ranges from Lectio Divina. There's music. I put a playlist in there. People can listen to it. Just different forms that I have found open up the space inside of me where healing can live. There's a Visio Divina. In fact, there's a picture on the back of the book and in the book. It's black and white in the back and in color it's black and white in the book and color on the back of a painting that I saw when I was looking for an image that would represent the healing of a heart. And it's what it's called, Healing Heart. And it's by an artist named Jenny Han. She lives in Kansas. But it's just, you spend time just looking at that painting. And how does that painting speak to you? So it really, like when I said, this is yours now. Yeah. When you get the book, it's your experience. It's your journey now. And so it is really unusual in the sense that you stay with that one verse and there's different steps to help you heal along the way. But not a whole lot of expectation. Like there's no endpoint that you're trying to reach. Just trying to get more connected to the God you may already know or not. You know, I didn't also necessarily write it for Christians either. But it's very Jesus-centered. But I think he speaks to a lot of different people. Yeah. And I will say in day 7, because I got a reviewer who called me on this, I used a salty word in it because it fit within the sentence context.
Sure.
But it's not something you would normally find in a Christian devotional, and that's what the reviewer said. But
that might be nice.
It's who I am, and she, you know, she actually asked me to take it out. I was like, it makes sense in the context. So it's not a really, really bad word. It starts with D. It's okay.
We'll be okay. Right. We'll make it.
We're adults. So.
Yeah. So we started our conversation before we began filming today, just talking a little bit about church hurt and the need for healing. What is your hope for those needing some spiritual healing from whatever that might be? We have a whole offering of things that could have caused hurt in recent days. What is your hope?
Well, I read a book last year over spring break called The Great Emergence by Phyllis Tickle, and the whole movement of the emergent church came from that idea. And it's this theory that every 500 years, the culture and the church religion shifts radically. And it really helped me because I'm like, oh, this makes sense now. I know what's happening. You know, you talk about, scripturally speaking, the birth pangs. You know, something new is being brought into the world. And that doesn't necessarily mean that what is the former thing that is going to pass right away. Do I think that churches are going to end tomorrow? Absolutely not. I don't think they'll end in 100 years. But I think that there is a generation, I know that there are generations coming behind us that need more than building, that need more than maintenance fees, that need more than committees. They need something that speaks to their soul, and they're looking for it everywhere. And it's there, but it's going to take us not even maybe returning to some old ways, ancient ways, but also not being afraid of questions, not being afraid to explore the expansiveness of God. When I talk about, I love Jesus, I'm a follower of Jesus. I read a book recently where she said that it's not just Christianity, it's Christianities. There's many forms of this faith, just like other world religions. And so we need some openness here and to get rid of the fear. I cannot stand fear, even though I deal with my own. But it's to me, it's the single greatest inhibitor of our thriving as humans. Is living into that fear, and because it brings about control, it brings about dominance.
Sure.
That's a whole other podcast. So, I feel like my hope is in the generations to come. And that's because I do have children and I see what they're going through. That something beautiful will come from all of this turning of the earth and the spiritual soil. so that fruit can be, new plants can grow to the surface, and then fruit can be born. God's not done, right?
I 100% agree. And I'm really encouraged to hear a lot of what you've said, because I'm definitely having those same thoughts and wrestling and realization that we live in a world that has just completely changed.
Yeah.
And I would argue in the last 20 years. And so how
the last 3.
are we going to continue? I know my world has completely changed in 3 years, right? And so how will we reach these people who are aware of that? And again, not interested in some of the things that used to be high values for American Christianity. How do we reach these young people who need some hope, who need some healing,
right?
Who need to believe and trust that there is a great God of great love on their team?
Absolutely.
How do we reach them? How do we be open to those new ways to do so? How do we embrace technology and the opportunities at our fingertips today? So I love that you said that. I'm really encouraged by that personally. So thank you. We're going to continue the conversation into episode 2, but if people are dealing with hurt today, what would be your one next step of advice?
I think if you are dealing with hurt, your first step is always to admit it to yourself, and then go tell somebody that you trust. And if you don't have somebody that you can trust, well, regardless, find a professional. I'm a huge fan of therapists, counselors, psychiatrists, whatever you need, because they help you sort through everything. The worst thing you could do is keep your hurt a secret, because it's just going to come out sideways. Yeah. So step 1, admit that you've got a hurt, and then God will lead you to the next step. God will put somebody in your path. It could be a stranger where you just tell them what you're dealing with, and then they'll, the light on the next step will appear. And it's a beautiful journey, and shameless self-promotion. You can also go buy my book.
Yeah. Tell us, where can we find your book if we're interested?
Amazon. That's the only place that it's available.
Yay!
So Amazon, you can search Come to Me. You can search Amy W. Vogel. Man, it's out there. And it's in 3 different forms. It's ebook, regular book, and then journal form.
Awesome. And where else can people connect with you if they want to learn more? Hear more?
Yeah, I'm really pretty active on Instagram. So my Instagram handle is AW Vogel, and I run the gamut. It could either be super, super deep or super, super nonsense. So
love it.
Just be careful what you're getting.
Awesome.
You know what you're getting.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today and talking to us. I hope that you will check out her book, Come to Me, on Amazon, and as well as check out her fun Instagram stuff so that you can get some depth and some fun stuff. Thank you for tuning in. Once again, I would love to have you join the conversation. We have been talking a little bit about church hurt and spiritual hurt and just the need for healing. So if you need a space to talk about that, I would welcome you to reach out, send your comments, send your feedback and your questions to sheleadscomments@gmail.com. And we'll see you next time. Thanks. She Leads is produced by me, Thea Curry-Fuson, recorded and edited by Pearland Podcast Studios. All thoughts and expressions shared by the guest are theirs and not the organizations they're affiliated with. Thanks for tuning in. Check us out next week to continue the conversation on She Leads.